Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming online and meeting with us virtually today. My name is Lynn O'Hara, and I'm the Director of Programs at National History Day. I'm so excited to be joined by Don McKinnon today. Don is a digital producer at Florentine Films, and we're going to focus today on multimedia resources and documentary resources. Now, I know if you're a History Day teacher, you've got students who are documentary fans, who often become our documentary producers in that category. But I think that these can provide some really interesting resources for use in your classroom. And obviously now we're working in a unique situation. And I think we're kind of pulling all kinds of tools into our toolbox, especially ones that maybe we wouldn't use so much or aren't as comfortable with. So what we want to do today, typically we've done strategies, then resources, but actually we're going to flip it. When we get started today, I'm going to turn things over to Don to talk about the resource. And then I'm going to throw out some ideas of how you might use these kind of resources with your students while you're in this virtual learning environment. As always, once we present, we're going straight to Q&A. We want to get your questions. So go ahead and put them in the question box if you're accessing this via a desktop or a laptop. And if you are on a phone or a tablet, go ahead and go to Twitter, use the hashtag NHD2020. So Ashley from our team is on the question box. Rick from our team is on Twitter. So they'll feed us any of the questions. We'll answer as many of them as we possibly can. And just like we've done in the last couple, if we don't have a good answer for you right away, we'll save them and send you an email. So keep those questions coming. We're curious to see what you have. So our goal today is to focus on different kinds of multimedia resources. And our friends at Unum have a really cool resource that we think can be very helpful for you, not only in the digital environment right now, but as you go back and start planning out your classroom strategies for next school year and, looking to get some ideas to get your NHD students inspired for that 2021 theme. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to turn things over to Don McKinnon. Don's going to tell us a little bit about this resource, a little bit about the work he does. And then when he's finished, I'll talk about some strategies or ideas for using it with your students. So Don, thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to get to present this to all of you teachers out there. This is a crazy time and you're doing unbelievably important work and you're having to be incredibly innovative and smart. And I think it's so cool that National History Day is having these this Ken Burns length, episode 7 of teaching history virtually. So honestly, what I'd love to do is just walk you through this. And the other reason I'm really happy is I'm super looking forward to the questions because to hear how you guys look at this and think about using it, just to, off the bat, like I'm not a teacher, obviously, and Unum was created to be a resource, not just for teachers, but as sort of a broad way to help us engage with our history in a new way and connect it to the present. So I think hearing from you guys, as we've been building Unum, about what clicks for you about how it could work or what we could do to make it better for you is something we'd love to hear about. So, I think quick background, as I said, I'm not a teacher. I'm someone who has loved and kind of worked on curation and discovery my whole life. I met Ken Burns a really long time ago. In 1999, I had built a company that was a music company. It was about helping people discover music beyond the obvious. So I would interview Yo-Yo Ma about how to get into classical music, or the Rolling Stones about how to get into Delta blues, which may seem like it has nothing to do with this, but in some ways does, right? It's about kind of creating new entry points for an audience who may find themselves exploring something that's unfamiliar to them, but giving them a sort of contextual halo that lets them approach it in a new way. And I sold that business to Starbucks, and I built the music business at Starbucks. And one day, I got a call from Ken Burns when he had just made his film on jazz, and he came out to Seattle, and that's sort of how I first got to meet him. I took him to, it was opening day of the, I think Lynn's heard the story, but it was opening day of the baseball season. So I scalped tickets and took Ken and the Red Sox were playing the Mariners. The Red Sox are his favorite team. His favorite pitcher, Pedro Martinez, was on the mound. So we were sitting sort of like behind home plate, and taking Ken Burns to a baseball game is an amazing thing. It's like taking Bono to an Irish bar. It's like people come down from the upper deck in between innings to talk to him about his treatment of Roberto Clemente in the baseball series. And out of that, Ken and I became friends and talked about various things over time. And one of the things we talked about was the unique nature of his films, right? So if you think about Ken as a director, he's different than any director in that his films all intersect, right? They all are sort of details in the Bruegel painting of America, right? Everything is sort of zooming in on this part or this part, but they're telling stories that you guys know, because your teachers, fit together in the larger, larger story. And they're actually, it's not just that he's telling those stories, it's the way he tells them, right? The grammar of the way the titles come up, there's different, David McCullough is the narrator for some, Peter Coyote for others, but the narrative style is very similar. So and what Ken was really talking about one day was, God, I feel that my films speak to each other, and I'd love to be able to trace the connections that run through them. And yet, I sort of have a website for each of my films, but nothing that sort of allows me to trace those connections. And that was the inspiration for Unum. I believe there's a teacher out there who wrote an email to Lynn, who may have seen the first iteration of Unum was an iPad app that we created in 2013, when creating iPad apps seemed like a really good idea. And it's a very beautiful and award-winning iPad app, but we then wanted to really extend it in a bunch of ways and make it accessible to anyone, whether a student on a phone, an Android phone, or someone on a desktop computer. And so we pivoted it to the web. But the spirit behind Unum is around, again, Ken wanting to trace those themes that run through history, whether it's innovation or leadership or art, and talking about how he's constantly sort of stepping in the same, he's like, in the video he talks about, I've been in the 1920s multiple times, but it's like you never step in the same river twice, right? I was in the 1920s for Prohibition, but then I was there for Not for Ourselves Alone on the women's suffrage movement, and I was there for, right? So he's constantly re-entering these and telling either new stories or different stories that if you could rearrange, he calls it rearrange the molecules of the films. I call it mixtaping American history in a sense, because I kind of come from making mixtapes, if any of you are old enough to know what a CD is. That sense of reorganizing things into a theme to let you see them in a new way. So that's the spirit behind it. And I'll do a quick walkthrough, and then we'll jump to some questions. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, okay. And so this is Unum, which I hope you've all seen. And as I scroll down, you come to, and I mean, I should start by Unum. I think speaking to this audience, I don't need to explain what Unum is, but as Ken talks about it, there's a Arthur Schlesinger Jr. quote of, "We have had too much pluribus and not enough Unum." So this is really around trying to find the stories that are from our shared past and that connect us. And I think the other, and a piece we're going to talk about in a minute, is sort of the connection to today, right? And the fact that we've sort of gotten sort of locked up in the binary oppositions of the present. And if we could sort of step into the past and look at a theme that has run through our history to today, but look at how it was, how it's unfolded in the past, it allows us to sort of return to the present, hopefully with more nuanced viewpoints. So this starts with essentially a video.
Hi, I'm Ken Burns. I hope you're all
which I think Lynn has sent to you. So this is the video hopefully everyone has seen. And if you've all seen it, maybe I should stop talking but I'll just try to go fast. But essentially, it's a really great
Safe and
walkthrough
doing
where he
well.
talks about why he created
From the
Unum
top down, but
and
also
gives
the
you a
bottom
little
up.
walkthrough
And
of the
all of
various
this is
resources, which I'm about to do. This is a featured topic on Unum, which I'm going to come back to in a second, but it's really, this one is on Earth Day 2020, where Ken had a conversation with a young climate activist on climate change, and they had a really interesting conversation, not just about climate change, but around movements and around sort of the contemporary landscape of working for change. These are Unum shorts, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'm going to come back to. But I wanted to sort of start here, which is in the core of the site, which is really the simplest way to think about Unum is Ken has gone into his over 35 or how many films it is now and curated out the best moments of those films and organize them, essentially mixtape them, organize them around topics that you can explore. So the first, you're going to see a number of rows here: themes, events, people, the AP US history teams, which we'll talk about. Wars wouldn't be a Ken Burns website without wars, and unfortunately it wouldn't be an American history website without wars. Time, and we're about to add places and other things. But if we come up to the top and look at the themes, you see we have protest, innovation, leadership, art, division, hard times, elections. Triumph and Tragedy is last year's National History Day theme. Breaking Barriers is this year's National History Day theme. And the one I thought I would leap into first is just, you can click anything and you'll jump into what is essentially a mixtape of scenes from Ken's films, but it isn't just the clips. You also get Ken's voice setting up the clips and introducing it. So here is just a snippet of Ken on introducing the topic of leadership.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Leadership is a set of responses to life. And the stuff of life is filled with friction. It's filled with resistance. It's filled with adversity. It's the collision between individuals and the larger events that they are either governed by or they govern.
So that's, and I think what's important here is Ken is trying to do what you guys do in the classroom, right? What you guys do is there's a book and it has facts and it has the things that occurred. And the two things we hope Unum can do is, one, tell the actual stories as he's done in the films, but also help make those connections. And Ken is here trying to sort of talk more largely about leadership. Then you're going to dive into a series of clips. They're chapterized. So the first one is on transcendent vision. This is a clip on the invention of Congress from his film on the Congress. This is a film on Thomas Jefferson from his film on Thomas Jefferson.
A lot of nations emerge from the mists of history, and
you have George Will talking about we're the only country formed around an idea, and Thomas Jefferson wrote down that idea. And then you get to Ken on Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural. Just play a little snippet.
One of the greatest speeches ever given in the history of the world, I will not limit it to my beloved republic, the United States of America, is Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural. It is short, it is tough, it is sweet, and completely to the point. It is.
So you get that context before you go into something you may already be showing in your classrooms, right? Which is, here's the scene from the Civil War on Lincoln's second inaugural. Which I'm not going to show you this whole thing.
Inauguration Day was called
with charity. Let us sow.
Jump to the right spot.
So
you
still
get,
must be said.
The reading of portions of the inaugural over the actual photograph of Lincoln giving it. But then you change pace, as one does in any great mixtape, right? So from that political leadership to creative leadership, and the pioneering force that Duke Ellington was in forming his band, to Eleanor Roosevelt working for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to Stanton and Anthony. And you get him, before you start watching the clip, you get
Two of the most extraordinary leaders I've ever gotten to know in the course of our historical investigations are Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. If you think about where women were when they started, you'll understand what heroism and leadership is right away.
And you get that little voice of Ken wrapping a little halo of context as you dive into a scene from Not For Ourselves Alone, introducing those two characters and how they work together. Franklin again. And then let's step out of the political arena. Let's just take you to leadership in war and a really harrowing scene featuring Hal Moore from the Vietnam War. Lewis and Clark, the scene where they're lost and almost all of their men are sure that that trail to the north, to the right, is going to take them to the Missouri. But Lewis walks 40 miles and comes back and says, I really think we got to go this other way. And they all follow. Pauline Sabin from Prohibition. And so you get FDR and Fear Itself. So this is just giving you this sense of the types of things that you can get here. John Muir as the leader of a movement. So that's a quick look at leadership. Another really great one, again, I'm going to now start going faster, is innovation. But I think
there is something in the water here. There is something in the DNA of us.
So again,
think of jazz. Human beings.
That sense of Ken speaking directly to the audience, trying to sort of set up these clips, which if any of you have ever been to a Ken Burns live event, this is sort of what he does. He stands up there and he sets up the clip and people get excited, and then you're immersed in the clip. So this is him talking about the voyage of Lewis and Clark. There's a bunch of stuff here on Horatio's Drive, which is really incredible. And then you get into chapter 3, which is paradigm shift. And I just love this opening of, before you get to a clip on broadcasting from his film Empire of the Air, which is fascinating and maybe increasingly fascinating, I would say. You get this.
We think about radio. If you look up a dictionary in 1900 and look under the word broadcast, broadcast would tell you that that's a farmer with a single bag of seeds and spreading them, broadcasting the seeds. Originally, when radio was invented, the thought was it would just be a way to have wireless communications, not a telephone, not a telegraph.
I'll tease that for you, but it's really great. And then when you dive into this, it leads you into a discussion, not just of the innovation of broadcasting, but what happens when, for the first time in history, a person with a single voice can speak unmediated to millions, right? Which has had some good consequences and some less than good consequences. So this is, going through the Shakers, Ken Burns on the Brooklyn Bridge. And then in any one of these clips, you're going to see a series of tags: infrastructure, cities, technology, innovation. And if you click, so if I click, for instance, New York City, it takes me to an instant playlist on New York City. And some of them are very short. This one happens to be one of my favorites. It starts with some things we just saw. The Congress started, as we know, not in Philadelphia. It tried to start in New York. The Brooklyn Bridge, Statue of Liberty, which is an incredible film. But it starts getting into things, Hunger and Thirst from Prohibition, speakeasies from Prohibition. And then opening day of the baseball season, this is Jackie Robinson's first day, right? And at Ebbets Field. And so putting that in the context of these are the moments of history that have happened in New York City. Let's just watch him run out on the field.
Pittsburgh Courier.
Great. And then, takes you up to Central Park 5, right? And the interrogations around Central Park 5, and a bunch of scenes from that, and ends with a scene from the 10th inning, which is his coda to the film on baseball, which is after 9/11, the decision to bring baseball back, which is actually really relevant in many ways right now. So that, and I think then I was just going to show you, so you can kind of jump into any of these, but AP US history theme. So we threw this up just in the last couple of weeks, when the COVID-19 thing happened, and have built playlists around each of the AP US history themes. You'll be able to see, we actually have sort of some reflection questions that some teachers who work with PBS Learning Media have written, which is great. And the other thing I wanted to show you quickly here is if I scroll down through Politics and Power, throughout Unum, you will see links to Ken Burns in the Classroom. So here you've been going through Politics and Power, and when you click this, it takes you to Ken Burns in the Classroom. And what that is something that was specifically built for you, right? So this is an educator-focused resource that gives you a bunch of, not just that clip and not just some writing, but if you click here and go support materials, it's going to scroll down. It'll give you handouts, an activity to do, a facilitator guide, and the handouts. So this is, and it's tied to specific, if you go to standards, it'll give you a bunch of things that you guys understand and I do not, which is around how, what portions of this are tying to the national standards for the curriculum. And so the idea is Unum is, trying to link to the relevant moments on Ken Burns in the Classroom. And likewise, Ken Burns in the Classroom is building links back. I'm going to show you a couple of more things and then I will be quiet until I'm asked a question. So search is really cool. And of course you can come in here and search for Louis Armstrong and you'll see a whole playlist of everything Louis. But what's really cool is this function that lets you say, well, I'm doing a paper on Boss Tweed. And I wonder if Boss Tweed has ever been mentioned in a Ken Burns clip. If you click this, it takes you
stately and magnificent.
Not just to the clip, but it starts playing the clip.
Such a source of pride that all was forgiven. The wire fraud, Boss Tweed, the delay.
Tweed. It plays the clip starts at 5 seconds before Boss Tweed is mentioned, whatever search term do you look for. And of course, then you can go to the beginning.
If the Board of Trustees
and watch this clip from the Brooklyn Bridge from the beginning. You can imagine how much fun this is. Maybe you're a kid in Boston, you're not from New York City. Why would you want to learn about New York City? I want to know what happened in Boston. Well, in this clip on hunger and thirst from the Prohibition.
The crops were left to rot in the fields. In Boston, children with cardboard soles on their shoes walked to school past sight.
So you get a moment from that clip relating specifically to Boston. Are you guys able to hear those clips when I play them? Yes. And I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was were these shorts. So we are now are starting to produce what we call Unum shorts, and each of them heads up its own playlist. This one is an Unum short called "Women May Finally Be Declared Equal." This one is called "Collective Mobilization." Each of the, I'm going to start with the collective mobilization. The "Women May Finally Be Declared Equal." Each short is basically Ken going and saying, here's a scene from one of my films of a moment in history that I want to show you. And this is why I want to show it to you. Not just because of what happened at that moment in history, but because of how it relates to our moment in history. So in this case, the cold open of this, which I'm not going to show you.
This is the Tennessee House.
This is the Tennessee House chamber on, I forget what day in 1920, when the Tennessee House was going to vote to ratify the 19th Amendment. And you start with this very Ken Burnsian, Florentine Filmian, still photograph on this moment. And he's explaining that the way this worked was, yes, it had been passed by the House and the Senate, but it can't become law until it's ratified by the State House, and it came down to the last State House. And because you're all teachers, you all know that it was passed by the deciding vote from Harry Byrne, the youngest member, who was carrying, say it with me together, a note from his mom. And it's an incredible story that is beautifully told in the film Not For Ourselves Alone. But what's so cool is Ken ties it to ERA, right? The fight to ratify the ERA, which has passed the Senate and the House and has made rounds of state legislatures and not been passed. And there's a really fascinating story. And my daughter, who is now 20, I remember when she found out, OMG, we are not, women are actually not legally equal right now. We are for voting, but not under the law. And so that is an example of what he's doing there. We have ones on sports and civil rights. We have a number of other ones that are coming. And in each of them, as you scroll down, you get an entire playlist of then clips from the films, including some primary sources. That's the Harry Byrne letter that let you, and that would link to the National Archives, et cetera, that let you explore that. So that is the shorts. The collective mobilization one you may like. It's really around, if you can, the scene he wants to show you is the incredible mobilization efforts around World War II, Ford turning Willow Run into churning out a B-52 bomber every 63 minutes, and tying it to obviously what's happening today. This is, you guys this
so
was a really great thing. You're teaching high school students, I think, or younger. This is Ken speaking with Jamie Margolin, who had just turned 18 and is, publishing a book which Greta Thunberg wrote the forward to, and Al Gore and Bill McKibben have written about, as well as Ken, and talking about not just climate change, but talking about national discourse in a really fascinating way. And then there's really fabulous scenes here, including the moratorium, which is the largest peacetime protest, or largest protest in our history. So I think I covered what I wanted to cover. I'll be quiet now. How'd I do?
I think that is awesome. And I think our teachers' heads are buzzing. What I'm going to do is take just about a few minutes here to kind of give some specific strategies that might help you figure out how you can use this with your students. And then we'll shift up to Q&A. So I can see there's already questions in the box. Keep them coming. This is a rabbit hole website, right? You can go in here and you can spend hours and hours. But what I really like about this particular website is the way it's segmented. Most of the clips are 2 to 5 minutes long. And that's a really good length that you can use with students. We spend a lot of time talking about analyzing primary sources, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about analyzing secondary sources. And I think some of these clips are really ripe for that, because I think sometimes students think that, kind of like books, documentaries just appear complete, and the people who work on them know that's really not the case. So what I might try with students is have them watch a clip and then have them watch it a second time. But I would assign out different tasks. Hey, group 1, I really want you to focus on the images. Group 2, I really want you to focus on the sound. Group 3, how about the music? How about the narration and the construction? And really talk about the decisions that the directors and the producers make in order to get it down to that little, 3-minute clip. I think it's important that we look at different ways that filmmakers tell stories and analyze them. Sometimes they rely solely on primary sources from the people and the voices of those who were there. Sometimes they use interviews with historians or experts. Sometimes filmmakers use reenactments, whether they be audio, so reading the words that someone wrote, or potentially filming reenactments.
Hey, Lynn.
Interesting one.
Lynn, sorry to interrupt. Are we supposed to be seeing slides attached to your screen? Because all we're seeing is your Zoom registration.
Oh, well, that's not very helpful now, is it? Excuse me, just 1 second. Let's fix that. I think it shared the...
And while you're doing that, I'll just jump in. I think that's such a cool exercise you were talking about. Something I talk a lot about, what I think is really fascinating about Ken's films is he's got, often what happens is, if you look at one of these scenes, you'll have sort of the voice of the narrator, right? Mm-hmm. Sort of the voice of God talking about how when FDR was inaugurated, all the banks were closed, right? And sort of tells you a story. Then it'll cut to raw footage from the Library of Congress, the National Archives, right? Mm-hmm. et cetera. And so you're sort of getting the real thing. And then it will cut to some, whether it's some voice that's adding their own perspective, right? And sort of adding a commentary voice. And I think that kind of tripartite structure that what he does is really interesting to think about, feeding into the little exercise you were just talking about.
Absolutely, because I think once students start to understand the structure and the ideas, it helps give them ideas when they're creating documentaries or writing papers of this idea of bringing in different perspectives and different ways to present the same content. I think too, it's important that students see that filmmaking evolves. So maybe you show them 2 clips, one maybe from a documentary that's maybe 20 years old and one from a more modern documentary, and have them compare. You can compare 2 NHD student documentaries on the same topic and talk about different choices that our student filmmakers make. I think there's a lot of different ways to do that compare and contrast. I also might throw out is use these as a base to build knowledge, right? A lot of times in class, we might ask students to read something. So maybe their bell ringer or their warm up is to read a simple handout or a secondary source. So maybe it's 2-3 pages long. And I think we could use a clip to do that. So I might start with the clip of, let's say, the ratification of the 19th Amendment. But then I would say, you know what, I want you to go back now and connect to this. I want you to go find a primary source. I want you to go find a good, legitimate secondary source, because we're helping to teach the research process, right? You take an event, but who would have the primary sources from that day? When would you go to the Library of Congress versus the National Archives versus the White House Historical Association versus the Smithsonian? And maybe there can be really good primary sources that you could find at each of them that could connect. So helping students kind of see the threads between the secondary and the primary sources is really important. I would also say, if you have the opportunity, let your students create. If they have the tech capability, maybe they can create documentaries. They don't have to be hours long. Maybe they could be 30 to 60 seconds. And if you're not ready to jump in and do a whole doc, because you may not have time, we're running out of weeks in this virtual school year as is. So take the first step. Maybe students can storyboard their documentary to tell us, if they were to make it, what kind of images, what type of video resources, what narration or effects would they want to include? And maybe if you don't have time for that, go to the most basic level. Let them pitch. So if you were on before we started, right at the top of the hour, I said, hey, what's the coolest topic that you can't find a documentary on? Ask your students the same question. Hey, we've been studying together for 6-8 months. What's the topic that you'd really like to create a documentary on? And maybe in doing so, you'll inspire some students to become documentary makers for NHD 2021. Okay, I'm going a lot. We got to get to Q&A. 2 quick reminders before we move forward to question and answer. Our historical argumentation webinar series, which is at the root of every NHD project. We were able to add additional scholarships for teachers because there's a lot of demand for this program. Cutoff is Friday. If you want to be considered, nhd.org/PD, sign up. You've got to sign up by Friday. We're cutting it off, and then we're going to get to our selection process. Also, we have other online courses going this summer. Deadline is June 10th. Check those out. We've got those linked. I've talked about them a lot. All right, well, before we move on, I'm going to actually stop sharing so we can go to large cameras. It's time for questions. Ashley, go ahead. What kinds of questions do you have coming in? I can see the little bubble popping up, so I know we've got some good ones. So what do you got today?
All right, so this one you may or may not be able to answer at this point, but teachers are itching to start on those, or itching to help students start on their 2021 projects. So they would like to know if there is a possibility of getting any clips relating to communication in history, the key to understanding later on this year.
Oh, Don, I'm sorry, you are muted.
I was being so good that I was on mute, right? Yes, of course. And when, wait, so is that, when is that topic?
Well, here's our plan. Typically, This is because we have a little bit of an odd year here. Typically, students could only start research for next year's project after the national contest in June.
Right.
This year, since we're in such an unusual situation, we made an official declaration to do a bend in the rules to allow research from April 1st. Now, the team at UNO has been really generous in creating these playlists.
Right.
And it's wonderful, and I believe that they will, but in the meantime, just look at some of the examples that Don was showing. I would challenge your students, hey, go through this and create a playlist. What would be the 4 clips or the 5 clips that you would put into this? Because
what is can you just say the actual topic? Communication
in history, the key to understanding.
I love that. That's so great. So, I mean, so fireside chats is incredible. So there's, I mean, anyway, so yeah, the answer is yes. There's like, we've got incredible fireside chats. And then there's a really great, I mean, it is the case that like Horatio's Drive, which is, you know, a film that not that many people have seen, I feel like, I'm always evangelizing, but it has a really incredible clip on talking about how in I think it's 1903 or something, just that was the first time a cable went for under the Atlantic. So there was transcontinental communication, and just like all the changes that were happening in communication at that time. So, and Empire of the Air on broadcasting obviously has great stuff. So there's tons of, we'll do it. We're here. We'll make one, and email us if you feel like we've missed one.
Absolutely. What I'll also mention to our teachers out there, if you go to nhd.org/themebook, the current Breaking Barriers theme book is up there, but we've put the theme narrative for next year up there. So you can check that out. It'll give you plenty of ideas to get started with your students. And we'll be releasing the new theme book the week of the NHD National Contest. So we'll have that up on our website and then be sharing it out all summer. So we don't have the whole book quite ready. It's like this close to finishing the editing process, but we've got the theme narrative done. We sped that process along. So that'll give you some ideas to get you going.
I would check out that theme narrative and maybe use that nifty search engine that is available on the UNO website to start entering in some of those keywords that pop up or some events that are mentioned in there, and see what is available in what's already published out there.
Yeah. But we will go, just really quickly, we have our own search engine, which is like searches across every script of every film. And we'll get, you know, we'll ask Ken Burns and Jeff Ward, like what we did for the last ones, Ken Burns, Jeffrey C. Ward, who writes the films, Dayton Duncan, Lynn Novick, you know, what do you guys think are the things that fit with these? So we'll get that done.
No, thank you. We are really blessed to have a whole lot of wonderful partners who create all kinds of resources. I know Ashley and I have been working with several partners who are trying to speed up and develop some resources that usually we'd have available in August, but this year we're working to have available in late June. So we'll keep you posted through the NHG listserv as these resources become available.
All right, next question from Molly. She goes, with the topic of duality, are there some notable figures who embrace duality? And she goes, I'm thinking of a project that 2 of my students did on Desmond Doss, who was able to serve our country while still holding on to his Seventh-day Adventist principles. So does anyone else, can you think of off the top of your head of figures in order to do some research that might also be available with documentaries on them and their kind of dual roles?
That is a good question. I don't know if we type.
You know what, I'll be honest with you. I think when you really study biography and you study the stories of almost any key leader in our history, I think we kind of get this like cleaned up G-rated version of somebody that's like, this is exactly what they did. But when you really start reading in, I mean, one thing I think is a key for our students to understand is that all the people they study in history are people, and they're flawed, and they're not perfect, and they've screwed up along the way. And I think there's power to that, because I think that when we kind of get past the myths of figures in history and we start realizing, oh, these are real people. And even if it's, hey, they usually made the right decision, but you know what, this one was a really bad idea. I think it helps students see that these are people. They might be in extraordinary times or extraordinary circumstances, but they're real people. Don, any ideas you might want to throw out for this teacher?
This is where we should have had Ken Burns on this thing.
Oh.
He would be like, "Oh, of course." You know, I mean, I'm thinking of it's sort of what you were just like. To me, it goes less to duality than complicated. You know, there's a great clip on Teddy Roosevelt. The Ken, if you go to the thing I was just starting when I was scrolling through, so Ken on TR talks about how he's probably the only true genius we ever had as a president, and yet how incredibly complicated he was. Duality, it's fascinating. I think I have to keep thinking on it, but
We'll
that's a
do a
good
little
question.
digging and we'll get you an email response on that one. That's one of those ones that
You got it.
on to later today or tomorrow and get you some.
I will phone a friend.
Go out.
All right. Our next question, with your search engine that you were showing, we had a couple of teachers who asked about that. And one question was, can we search the word primary sources in the search engine and will it pull stuff?
So so there isn't necessarily at this moment a box for that, but we will be adding that. And let me just look at something. Am I sharing my screen again or no?
Yes, you are.
Do you see AP US History or am I sharing a different screen?
Yes, we see that.
US History.
All right. So if we go back to, so if we go Harry Byrne. Yeah. So what'll happen is it'll add, do you see these up here?
Yep.
So I'd say in about a few weeks, we'll actually have a thing here that will say, so stories, clips, featured, and then if it's a primary source, like from Library of Congress, et cetera, or a Ken Burns Classroom link, et cetera.
I think that's a really good point. One thing I think we've tried to get across in these series is that we want to look at how each organization structures their search. So in this case, you might want to use some more bigger terms as opposed to more specific terms, and then kind of narrow down from there. And honestly, so many of the digital resources are evolving and growing. I think one of the bright things that's come out of this is that people have had some time to kind of focus on these projects that sometimes get put to the side in other cases, and digital resources are growing and changing. And I think this is just another kind of cool example. And, you know, this is a resource that's only going to get bigger and better over time.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I add one more thing of like, so we'll be adding, so we just did a sort of redesign and relaunch of the site. So the primary resources are also good. That's one thing that'll be coming up. And the other one is I showed you a lot of examples of Ken adding his voice for context, but what we also have is Ken has asked interesting thought leaders and figures to add their perspective. So for instance, on John Muir, you have the clip from the National Parks on John Muir, but then you have Bill McKibben, the environmentalist, talking about why he loves John Muir. On Huckleberry Finn, a scene from the film on Mark Twain about Huck Finn, the author John Green, who wrote The Fault in Our Stars, who would be very familiar to many of your students, has a really fantastic John Greenish take on why Mark Twain was radical and why Huck Finn was radical. For Kent State, I had John Legend record a cover of Woodstock for a Spotify partnership we did for the Vietnam War film. But in the recording session, I found out that his father was actually in the Ohio State National Guard. He wasn't actually there that day, but it was fascinating. And he talked, and there's a really wonderful, powerful connection he makes between watching Kent State and sort of Black Lives Matter and Ferguson, et cetera. So I think the other thing you'll see coming up in the search engine and more in Unum over the next month is we'll be adding those things back in and those sort of extra voices.
Excellent. They'll be very popular with our students and teachers, I'm sure. All right, Ashley, what else do we have?
All right, so Wes has asked, can you download or attach these videos to a third-party site like Edpuzzle, which will allow you to embed questions that students can answer while they watch the videos, or are they pretty much stationary to the Unum page?
So right now, I would say they are, I don't think we're providing the tools that allow you to do that. But I take, that is something that we have on our list of things to work on. And part of the thing is we're using, without getting too into the weeds, we're using a player, one digital player called JW Player, which is amazing for a bunch of reasons, but we're actually going to integrate with the same video player that PBS uses across pbs.org and PBS Learning Media. So part of, I think we'll be able to, as we make that transition, make sure we're enabling what you're asking for, Wesley.
Excellent. More things to look forward to.
Kind of similar off that, we've also asked, Nicole asked, are there ways to send links direct to students about specific information included in the sections? So can they go directly to a page and be able to send that link, or is it housed under one link?
Yeah, so you can, if I'm understanding that question correctly, if you were in protest, you can share the entire thing here, right? So this would give you the whole thing, or obviously I could just go grab the URL at the top of the page. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
But if you just wanted to share Seneca Falls, you can go to a specific clip, copy the link, email, share, etc., and this will share this clip.
Excellent. So there's lots of options to be able to send students either to the whole playlist or to directly where you want them to go if you want to feature one of the clips.
Okay, question from Stephanie. She would like to know, can teachers create their own playlists?
I thought we would get that question. Think how cool that would be. Yes, I mean, yes, we would love that to happen. So that is, I mean, that's a bigger thing that's on the horizon, but I think it is on the horizon. Let me ask a different thing. Would these do people, we have one person asking that question, do people in general think, and I'm asking you as teachers, would you find that helpful to be able to build your own set of clips and share it out?
I have a feeling I'm going to get bombarded in a minute.
Yes.
In the Q&A box.
Okay.
But I think a lot of teachers kind of do this already.
Right.
Where they either kind of digitally rip off DVDs, not that I ever did that because that would be against rules. Right. Or they create, where they have DVDs or they have access to electronic files where they create links. Or they pull files off and kind of have them queued up and ready to use at different pieces. But Ashley, what's our question box saying? What our teachers have to say?
They have just blown up, and pretty much it's been a resounding yes. They would like that. That would be helpful, and it also would help them tailor things specifically to students in their grade level.
Great.
Oh, good. So you've got the answer that you wanted there.
Yeah,
no, the answer you wanted or the answer you didn't want, but
no, I want that
our
answer.
teachers
That's
would
good.
love that feature.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Let's see.
Ashley, any other questions? Once we get
I'm waiting for a couple of updates on a couple of questions. So if you see a question back on your question, make sure that you're answering me so I know for a bit more specifics on your question and what it's relating to. But right now, they are still telling me yes, they really want to create their own playlists. So that's taken up.
I like that Kathy Gorin has replied to the podcasting question by saying, yes, we will add that after we retire. I'm actually
while we're waiting here, we'll give people about one more minute, and if we don't hear back, what we'll do is we'll take those questions offline and get you responses later. But Don, I'd love to ask you, out of all the clips or all of the films, what's your favorite, or what's the one that maybe teachers and students haven't seen that you think they should go check out because you think they'd find it really fascinating?
I often go to, there's a clip on, and in some ways, the approach to Unum shorts, I mean, it's really from Ken, but a number of them are my favorites. I think that Harry Byrne story is an incredible story from the 19th Amendment. My first answer, though, is the second film he made is on the Statue of Liberty. And in that film, which is an incredible film, and the way you can think about it is the first half is on sort of the history of the making of the Statue of Liberty, and the second half is on different people giving their perspectives on the Statue of Liberty. And that includes David McCullough and Mario Cuomo and a number of folks. One person who he talks to is James Baldwin, the author James Baldwin. And it's an absolutely incredible interview. And I've heard him tell so many stories about making his films, but I'd never heard the story where he wasn't yet Ken Burns, right? He had made the Brooklyn Bridge, which I think was nominated for Oscars and stuff, but this is his second film. Baldwin was teaching at Hampshire College. Baldwin wouldn't go let Ken shoot him in some place that he was going to set up. Baldwin was like, you have to just set up in this classroom across the hall. And so while he was waiting for Baldwin to come for the interview, and Baldwin made him wait, he went up on the chalkboard and he wrote the second sentence of the Declaration of Independence. And Baldwin came in and sat down, and Ken said, I just looked at him and my first question was, what is liberty?
Wow.
It was an amazing question. And if you watch the clip, you'll see Baldwin go, literally he goes, what is liberty? I suppose one rarely asks oneself that question. Well, I suppose I could quote the Declaration, and he's looking over Ken Burns' shoulder. I could quote the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident. But where that clip goes and what he ultimately says the Statue of Liberty reflects is a really incredibly powerful clip that I think is amazing. There is another clip called, and we're doing an Unum short on that. There's another clip that I really love, which is from Prohibition, and it's called Real Americans. And it's if you look at immigration as a playlist, it's in there, or you could just search for Real Americans. And it has the writer Pete Hamill talking about why they wanted to see, how people were concerned about all these different types of immigrants coming into America. And what they didn't understand was that they made a mixture of metals, an alloy, a mixture of metals that made it stronger. I think that's an incredibly powerful scene. Those are two of my favorites. The third one we're doing, which I think would be really interesting for kids, I hope, is Jack Johnson, the boxer. And the cold open of that this is Rushcutters Bay in Australia, Sydney, Australia. And Jack Johnson is about to knock out the white champion to become the first black heavyweight champion of the world. And they literally stop the fight and throw blankets over the cameras because they can't, at that moment, handle seeing it. And I think that clip is really great. And so Ken sort of abstracting out of that to why he makes films on sport, that sport gives us an X-ray into the sort of where our country is. Sport's often where many Americans see things first. That ultimately ripple through the society as well. So those are three.
Excellent. Well, and there's so many more quotes. I'm sure so many more great ideas buried in. And I think you're going to have a lot of clicks on your website this afternoon once our teachers are done their virtual teaching for the day, because this is a really cool place to go. All right. Well, I think we're pushing up on our time. There's a couple more questions in the queue. We'll get them squared away, and we'll make sure that either we answer them or we send them to Don to get answers for you. But I want to take a minute and just say a huge thank you. Thank you to Don McKinnon and the team from Florentine Films and Unum for joining us today. Thank you to all of the presenters who've joined this Teaching History Virtually series. While this is a series and a set of programs we did not have planned, I'm really proud of the work that we've done and that our teams and partners have contributed and continue to contribute to teachers and students across the nation and around the world. I will mention to our teachers who are listening, if you want to see any of these other series, maybe you missed one, go to nhd.org/THV. If you'd like to send this to your friends, we'll have this posted up a little later today. Please be patient. It takes about an hour for the video to process for me, but we'll get those posted up and get links, and we'll share a bunch of links out. And for everybody who registered, thank you for all you're doing. Please remember to be flexible with your students. Please remember to be kind to yourselves. Be open to learning, be open to trying. You got nothing else to lose. So thank you for joining us and for making this a really successful series.